Welcome back, Doomtown fans, to part 2 of my foul play review. In this section, we're going to be looking at all of the non-dude cards that are in the pack. We're going to start out with a couple of deeds, and the first one that we have is called the Joker's Smile. It's an ace of diamonds, it's 0 control points, it's 1 to play, and it has no income. It's private, a casino, and a saloon. Whenever a Joker is aced during low ball, the controller gains a Ghost Rock, and then it has Controller Noon Boot, discard a Joker to gain a Ghost Rock and draw a card. Controller Noon Boot, pay 1 Ghost Rock to move a Joker from your boot hill to your discard pile. This is one of those cards that I definitely think should exist, but it's so very narrow in scope, I'm not sure it's going to see a ton of play. The first thing that I thought of with this was Dead Man's Hand decks. The Joker is really useful with the Dead Man's Hand decks because usually the main problem that you run into is you need to draw a Jack of Diamonds. And you're only going to be able to play 4 of those. If you end up playing one of them down to the table or acing one of them, it's going to make it hard to draw that Jack of Diamonds later in the game when you really need to make Dead Man's. So having Jokers still in your deck is going to be really good. And I see this last ability, the ability to move your aced Jokers back into your discard pile, as being the most useful part for that purpose. The other thing that's kind of nice about this with the Dead Man's deck is that it is an ace, so you can play this to fill out some of those values on ace that aren't part of the Dead Man's, so that you have kind of a backup draw structure that can make full houses and whatnot before you thin out your deck enough to consistently make the Dead Man's. I think this might see a little play in those Dead Man's decks, but in general, I don't know if this is really good enough for most other decks. The next deed is called Old Marges Manner. It's a 9 of diamonds, it's worth a control point, it's 2 to play, and it has 1 income. It's private. The controller can use Ghost Rock on this deed to pay for action cards or gadget abilities during shootouts. Then it has React Boot. Before making a play, move all Ghost Rock counters, not bounties, from a card you control to this deed. And then it has Noon Boot, place 1 Ghost Rock on this deed. This deed kind of has a specialized set of abilities, but I do think this is pretty universally good for a couple of reasons. First of all, it's a 2 cost, 1 income, 1 control point deed. Those are good all around. It also has the ability to just charge itself up, so you can just Noon Boot it over a series of turns and save a few Ghost Rock when you're playing action cards. Almost every deck has action cards, and there's quite a few decent action cards that cost Ghost Rock, so I think that's something that would be pretty easy to use in a bunch of decks. This gets even better though if you have gadgets in your deck, because not only will you have a better outlet for spending the Ghost Rock, but you can also play a deed like Lula's Exploit, which is going to continuously recharge these 2 credits on itself every turn, and you'll be able to move those over to the Marges Manner, and not only use those for action cards or just have more, ease of use with that, but you'll also be able to just pile up Ghost Rock over a long series of turns, and that's going to give you a big cache of Ghost Rock that you can use on these gadget abilities. Now that's of course balanced by the idea that your opponent could just steal this deed and then use your Ghost Rock that you've been building up on the deed to play action cards or whatnot. I have a feeling that any deck that's playing 9s is going to very heavily consider this. Pretty much the only reason I wouldn't play this in my deck is if I exclusively played 0 cost actions and I had no use for a cheap 9 deed that was also worth a control point and had an income. This to me seems like it's going to be pretty easy to use in quite a few decks, but it's going to be absolutely best in like a Morgan Gadget style where you have more outlets for this ability. Now we're getting into the goods cards, and the first one that we have is called Zemo's Turban. It's a 5 of hearts, it gives +1 influence, it's 0 to play. It's experimental, a tire, and it's a gadget with difficulty 8. Repeat Noon Boot, pull. If the pull is not a club, you may pay 1 Ghost Rock to draw a card, discard a card, and unboot it. Here's another card for the clubless gadget decks, and I think this could maybe see a little bit of play even outside of the clubless builds, but this is definitely a gadget deck card only. Now you're going to get a free influence no matter what, that's awesome. And if you have a bunch of Ghost Rock and consistently not pull clubs, you can just burn through your whole deck. You're going to draw so many cards with this thing. It's a single-handed draw engine that can definitely help you locate the things that you need most. It's also another way that you can use Lula's exploit as well as the old Marges Manner that we just looked at. So here's another outlet as a way to spend those difficult to spend Ghost Rock. This is a pretty interesting option for those gadget decks, but unfortunately, like most of this gadget stuff, it's really only going to work in that context. The next card is called Blight Serum. It's a Jack of Hearts, it's 1 to play. While this card is attached to a deed, after a dude moves here, move that dude home booted and ace this card. And then it has Noon Boot, attach this card to a deed. This is a pretty interesting card. I think it's probably a little confusing for a few players, so let's just go through how this works. Since this is just a normal goods card, you're going to have to attach it to one of your dudes first. If you notice all of the other like improvement style goods cards, they just straight up say that they attach to the deed when they're invented or when you buy them. So this is not going to do that. You're going to have to first attach it to a dude, then that dude is going to have to be in the location that you want to attach it to use this Noon Boot play to get it there. This is pretty obviously a defensive card. You're going to use it to secure a location. Like, you're going to want to use it on a deed that's worth like either a lot of control points or has some ability that's really important that you need to maintain. So for me, this seems like it's going to be a very mass deeds, dudes and deeds style deck. I don't really see you wanting to play this in just kind of a more conventional deck because it is going to work on your own dudes. So once you get this thing there, you're going to want to make sure that you don't move another dude there because it'll fire on him. This is kind of interesting, but it's really awkward to get set up, especially if you have a big deed line. And I just really don't know what I'm going to play this card in. Next up, we have a new horse. This is Guide Horse. It's a Queen of Hearts. It's 1 to play. It's a horse. And it has Noon Boot. Move this dude to the town square. Anytime we have a new horse, we need to immediately look at Morgan's stables. And I think this is pretty much exactly what those decks are going to want. The 1 cost is awesome. Cheap horses are sometimes not easy to find. And this one's also at a high value, so if you're doing anything pull-oriented, that's good. It's also at Queen, which is easily one of the best values for draw structures, period. There's just so many awesome cards that you're going to want to play at Queen. So I think that there's just a lot of reasons that you would want to play Queens as your draw structure. And if you can do it with a bunch of horses in your stables deck, that's going to be even better. Now, this one is somewhat limited in its ability to get you where you need to go. It's going to move you to the town square, which may or may not be an area that's safe for you to go. If you really need to get somewhere else, there's a lot of horses that would get you there easier. So this is, being cheap and on a good value. It isn't quite as strong as some of the other horses that are options, but I think really the cost and the value are going to be the determining factor, especially in Morgan's stables where you're probably playing a ton of other horses anyway. And you can also mitigate some of the limited nature of this card by just using the React Boot ability on stables. You can move to the town square and then you could take a move in action to go wherever you need to go. The next goods card is called Marty. He's a Queen of Hearts as well. He's 2 to play and he's a sidekick. He can only attach to a Mad Scientist. This dude has +1 Mad Scientist skill. And then he has React Boot. After this dude boots to invent a gadget, unboot him. This is the card I was talking about in the first video that was pretty obviously meant to work with Lucky Skyborn. Not only does the flavor text suggest that, but These cards obviously synergize really well together. I see Marty as being a great choice for the starting posse's sidekick, and I think that in general, Marty is going to be a good addition to any gadget deck. It's going to be a high pull. You're going to get that +1 Mad Scientist, which is always nice. But this React Boot thing, I think, is really the biggest thing. It's going to make it so that you could potentially invent another gadget later. It's going to make it easier to move around or get the goods cards where they need to go. And just in general, your Mad Scientist being booted is one of the big limitations to inventing the gadgets you need to do and getting the cards where they need to go. I was just talking about how Queen is an awesome value, and Marty has that going for him as well. But you do have to consider that there are two pretty decent gadgets that are also competing for that value. We got Biocharge Neutralizer. That thing's pretty good. It just makes your guy bigger and it makes him immune to certain card effects that you're worried about. Also, we have Vitality Tonic, which if you're playing clubless, it's a really, really nice solution to Paralysis Mark. I'll probably be playing one Marty and just planning on starting him with Lucky. I don't really see filling up all my Queen slots with that. I would rather have one of those gadgets, but I definitely think he's going to be worth that one slot if you're starting Lucky in your opening posse. The next card is a new Miracle. This is Righteous Fury. It's an Ace of Hearts, it's 2 to play. It's a Miracle. Shootout Miracle 8 Boot. If you win this round, your opponent suffers 2 additional casualties. Shootout Miracle 12 Boot. Your opponent suffers 2 additional casualties this round. Ace this card. Generally speaking, miracles are really hard to cast, and this one is probably the most extreme example of that you can think of. Not only is it ace, so it's going to be really hard if you pull it like when you're making a different miracle pull, but it's also got really, really high requirements with 8 or 12. And the 12 is really the one that I think you want to be able to use if you're going to even consider playing this card. The fact that you can just make your opponent suffer 2 casualties, even if you lose, is super huge. That said, I'm not sure there's really a whole lot of incentive to try to get this card to work. I think this is probably going to go the way of Soothe, which is another miracle that I think is really strong, but it never really sees any play because the pull requirement is so high. And since we mainly just have blessed 0 or 1 dudes, we have to build extremely high pull structures in order to be able to cast these spells with any amount of reliability. So I think if you were going to try to make this card work, you'd want to play multiple copies of it. You'd want to have multiple shots at pulling it. You really need to be able to have multiple instances of this and have a really high pull structure. And for me, I don't know if there's a whole lot of incentive to do that. I think we need 1 or 2 more absolutely high-end miracles like this if we're going to consider building a pull structure that high. Next up, we have a new Spirit. This is Owl's Insight. It's a 7 of Hearts. It's 0 to play. It's a Spirit. Cheat and Resolution Spirit 5 Boot. Attach any number of goods or spells from your play hand as shopping, reducing the cost of each by 1. Draw cards until your hand is at its maximum hand size. This reminds me a lot of Consecration and also Fetch. The big thing here is that you're going to be able to fire this thing off during low ball, and that's going to be so awesome if you get it to work. Not only are you going to get to draw more cards, but if you're playing like the Spirit Fortress deck, you're probably going to have a ton of spirits in your hand, at least 1 or 2. So you're going to get to draw a couple extra cards, and you're going to get to play reduced cost spirits, and you're going to get to do this all off of a low ball pull. So I think in general, this is going to be the Spirit low ball card. I think you'd probably only want to play a few copies of it, but I think it's going to be good enough. 7 is going to make most of your pulls. As long as you have a little bit of shaman skill, you're going to make most of your pulls. And I see this as being something that you're going to want to play maybe 1 or 2 of in the Spirit Fortress deck. Now we're getting to the action cards. And the first one that we have is called Outgunned. This is a Jack of Clubs. It's 0 to play. It has resolution. If your posse has a higher total bullet rating than the opposing posse, boot your shooter to increase your hand rank by 2. I really like these resolution effects. This reminds me quite a bit of Point Blank in some way. The biggest thing with this is you're going to have your shooter unbooted so you can use this ability. And that's going to be reasonably difficult to do. This to me seems like it's going to be good enough, especially if jacks are on value for you. But I think it's also going to be really solid for decks that play tons of high bullet dudes, especially when you play lots of 2 and 3 stud guys, like in a Sloan deck. I think there's some Law Dogs decks that are capable of that. So I think in general, this is going to be pretty hard to use for the booting the shooter aspect. But I really like this type of resolution play. It just gives you more options to influence the outcome of a shootout without it just being based on cheating. The next action card is also a resolution play. This is Martyrs Cry. It's a Queen of Clubs, it's 0 to play, it has resolution. Discard a miracle from a dude in your posse to reduce your casualties by 3. If your opponent has an illegal draw hand, you may reduce your casualties by 5 instead. I'm not really liking this card. There's already plenty of ways within miracles and the dudes that cast them to reduce our casualties, and having a resolution play like this, especially at Queen of Clubs, to me seems like something I'm not going to be willing to play. The big thing is, if I was going to play Queen of Clubs, I would rather just play It's Not What You Know, which is, I think, a better resolution play. Lowering their hand rank and paying that 2 Ghost Rocks seems better to me. And then if they do cheat, you get to absolutely destroy them by reducing their hand rank by 4. I don't know, this seems really weak to me. It's something that we can already do with some of our miracles. It's eating up a really good value that we have plenty of other good cards to play. And just in general, I'm not sure in which context I'd want to use this. The only thing I can really come up with is if we see more powerful, can only be used on the second round of a shootout type effects, this could maybe be good. It could help you survive that first round of the shootout so that you can get your second round stuff off. But right now, really all we have is something like Evanor. And with Evanor, I think one of its best parts is the loser takes an additional casualty if you win the round. So you don't want to lose the round. You don't want to be taking casualties with Evanor. I don't know. I'm not really seeing the use for this card. I feel like we can already do this better with other cards that aren't eating up this valuable slot. I would have much rather seen something like Righteous Fury on this card, something that actually made it so my opponent took more casualties or just somehow hurt them more. I don't think reducing my casualties is something I'm really wanting to do. The last card in the saddlebag is called Deliberate Infection. It's a King of Clubs, it's 2 to play, it's a condition. This dude has +1 upkeep and -1 influence. Cheatin' resolution. The cheatin' player attaches this card to one of their dudes. Send that dude home booted. If this is a shootout, you choose the dude. Here's another one of those lowball cheatin' punisher cards. I don't really see this being very good as a shootout-oriented cheatin' resolution play. We already have way more powerful things we can do with that. So the big thing I'm seeing here is if that they cheat during lowball, you'd be able to make them attach this to one of their dudes of their choice. And that's going to mean that they're probably going to choose somebody like Travis Moon. They're not going to get the -1 influence, which I think is easily the best part of this card. So, I don't know. I'm pretty iffy on this. It's really expensive. It's got a nice value if you're trying to pull high, but I think there's already some better options at the king slot. And just in general, I don't think this card is good enough for its cost. It's not really that punishing during a shootout, and during low ball, it's going to probably not do a whole lot. It's basically just going to reduce their income by 1. So, I don't know. I'm not too excited about this card. That's going to do it for my foul play review. There's a lot of interesting designs in here. I think that the designers are really starting to explore some of the edges of the shootout structure, as well as some of the things that they can do with conditional abilities built into dudes, especially if dudes have things attached, good things happen. I think is a really, really smart approach to dude design. So I'm excited about the direction that these designs are headed, but I do think this is a pack where you're going to want to know which cards you're looking for before you pick it up. Thanks for watching. If you liked the video, be sure to subscribe and click the button that looks like a thumbs up, and I'll see you soon for some more Doomtown stuff.